The newly minted watch enthusiast has more options than they care to count. And if you're new to this hobby, you're probably looking at half a dozen different watches, or even a dozen different watches that you would consider buying next. I want you to add this one to your list. And not just that, I'd push it pretty high up on your list to at least try on and wear. This watch has some incredible features from a brand that has, I think, been killing it recently. And this is the Longines Conquest. Let's look at Tom. Tom is a watch enthusiast that reached out to me a few weeks back. He's trying to get suggestions on what to buy after my video on first luxury watch recommendations. So if you're interested in that video, link should be up above. During that video, I left out one popular brand, and that's Longines. And that was my mistake, mainly from a lack of exposure. I've seen them for a long time. I've watched them on eBay, but I haven't actually purchased anything from them before. I finally got this into review. And I think quite possibly it's probably one of the best options for someone like Tom. To recap what Tom wanted, he wanted a modern watch that he could buy sub $2,000 with 100 meters water resistance, a wearable 38 or 39 millimeter case, relatively thin, time and date only, and something that could look dressed up if he needed to make it more versatile. Ideally, he didn't have to pick a black dial, so a colorful option like blue or green was preferred. He was interested in something that was a little bit different than the standard, like something I would purchase. He wanted a premium feel as well, something that felt luxury. And I think, honestly, you nail all of that in this model and in probably most Longines models in general. The best part about this watch is that it's predictable. It's kind of what you want without having to say, I just want a standard watch. And there's nothing wrong with standard. Now, there are a few things on here I think that are great, but the biggest part about this that I love is the fact that you get all of this stuff in a price package that most people would really consider who are either new to watches or just want to add something to their collection that's at a lower price point. Now, this Conquest model here is the 38 millimeter version. It has a green sunburst dial. The case specifications are up on the screen, as I said, 38 millimeters. It does have a 19 millimeter lug width, which is obviously not my favorite, 10.9 millimeters thick, 122 grams on this bracelet. It does have a standard movement in the back with an ETA, but because ETA is underneath the Swatch brand, you could potentially call this an in-house movement, but that's nothing to take away from an ETA movement. This one specifically, and some ETA movements just feel different. I want you to try and hear this winding action here. Honestly, I can barely hear it. And I'm someone that is very tactile, I think, with watches. How they feel, the bracelet, how it feels, where it's beveled, where it's sharp, the overall aesthetic here of where they taper it, how thin the lugs are, so how much they can articulate, making it more flexible, obviously how light it is. When it comes to winding the watch, I'm all about that initial wind. You know, a manual wound watch, you need to feel a little bit of that click spring bouncing back and forth. And so you have more of that tactile response. With an automatic watch, I much prefer something that's smooth, that when you wind it, you barely feel like you're winding it and you're wondering if you're winding it at all until you put it up to your ear. And that is what I really like. I don't know why, but that's something that I prefer. And that's something you do find in this watch. Obviously, this isn't without its minor flaws, and I'll cover that later on. But the benefit here is that you're going to be getting, I think, a watch that spans a lot of options. It's going to give you that versatile feel. My wife's Datejust looks very, very similar to this in exactly the same style layout, except obviously in this case, the lume plots are on the inside of the dial instead of the outside of the dial. They're not raised because they're not from the 1980s. And you have an applied logo here with the wings underneath the Longines name, which is printed. The date is on the dial as well, but instead of at 3 o'clock, it's down at 6. The bracelet here, I think, is one of the features that people are really gonna enjoy. Now, it doesn't have micro adjust. At this price point, very few brands offer micro adjust outside of micro brands, in which case you can get pretty much whatever you want for $2,000. But if you're looking at a Swiss brand like Longines or from the Swatch Group or anyone else, finding a bracelet with a micro adjust under that with a butterfly style clasp, I mean, they're not even getting the butterfly style clasp with a micro adjust correct on the Omega Aquaterra, which is 2.5 times or 3 times the price of this watch. So you can't ask for everything. It still has a really nice feel to it. Screwed links, obviously, But what I really love about a bracelet like this is the fact that it's light and that it can articulate in so many different ways. I'm going to cover a Bremont later, and that bracelet does not articulate the way that this one does. I can rotate it backwards, obviously almost all the way back on itself, and forwards all the way on itself, and it wants to move to it, which I think helps it conform to the wrist and feel almost like it's not there. Very flexible bracelets is something that I personally really enjoy. You do have crown guards on this, which is not something you would find, I guess, on a standard watch with just a screw down crown. I like crown guards. I think they add a little asymmetry to the case, which I think allows it to look a little bit different than just a crown popped on the end. The polished bezel here is very flat, not domed like you would find on an Oyster Perpetual, for example. This flat bezel is much more like what you would find on an Explorer. And the last big benefit here you're gonna have is obviously the movement itself. As I said, you could consider this an in-house movement. It is obviously machine decorated, but I think nice they did some pelage work on the bridges. They have a little bit of Geneva stripes here on the balance rotor, and I think it just looks nice. So it offers a lot of, I think, really great things for the price. But there are obviously going to be some downsides to that. One, you could say the style is relatively derivative. The hard part is like, how do you decide what is and isn't derivative? Because every watch has looked like this, including prior Longines models that look just like this from decades and decades ago. So if you avoid the derivative part, it is pretty standard in what you would look for a watch. There isn't a whole lot here that really calls out that's different. They do have this rim, I guess, that's kind of engraved, these lines that are engraved on the outer end of the dial that go through the stick markers, which I think does add a little bit of separation of the dial. And I think that that is a nice touch. Even the date complication there with the white background is relatively standard. That being said, the downsides would be the fact that they didn't color match the date disc. I always find a white date disc on a really different color to be very noticeable. So it does not tuck away. You very much notice that the date is there. That could be good or bad, I guess, depending on your perspective. I personally don't like it as much. I think the micro adjust in the clasp obviously is a problem. Now each of these links are relatively small, so you should be able to find a good size for you. It won't be perfect, but it should be pretty darn close to correct for your wrist. The other downsides are little things, right? Like the rotor, you can hear the rotor. You can hear the rotor a little bit. It's not like a 7750 if you've ever owned a Valjoux 7750. The single winding oscillating rotor does make a lot of noise, but it doesn't sound like that, but you do notice the rotor a little bit. It isn't quite as loud. I handled a Patek Philippe 5790G the other day, and it was a fun experience, but you could hear that rotor even more than this one. So I guess audible rotors does not go away the more money you pay. That is something to know about this watch. Quick shout out to Exquisite Timepieces in Naples, Florida. They send me watches every so often to review. There's no money exchanging hands. They don't pay me. I don't get any other sort of compensation. I just ask for a watch because I want to get hands-on, and they send it up, and I always appreciate that. So if you're in Naples, Florida, or you're shopping online, at least check them out and shop around. The polished center links on this bracelet and polished little clasp back here does mean that you're going to get smudges everywhere and scratches everywhere. And that is just part of having that aesthetic. It is a little bit more dressy. It does lean a little bit more that way. Granted, it could definitely be worn every single day. The 19mm lug width also, I think, is a huge detractor for me. Although I have noticed a lot of my watches, there's an Oris Pro Pilot over there with a 19mm lug width. The Zenith El Primero Chronomaster that I reviewed a few weeks ago also has 19mm lug width. I don't know if there's like a consortium of people trying to promote 19mm lug widths, but I'm finding them on a lot of watches these days. So odd size lug widths, I guess, are back in vogue. The Submariner 21mm lug width. They should just keep it to 20. I don't care about proportions. Like, just keep it to 20 in my opinion, but I get it. Like, there are minor differences that could make it look better. I'm not a huge fan of the lume plots on the inside of these indices. I feel like it encroaches a little bit too much on the dial. I'd prefer the dial kind of stop at the end of those indices and those lume plots be further away or even not there. Ideally, the lume would be on the indices themselves, but if they were not there, I think it would look aesthetically nicer, kind of like it does at 12 o'clock and 3 and 9, where there is no lume plot. If you want something that's Swiss rather than a micro brand, because you can definitely get more for your money if you buy a micro brand. for something Swiss, you're looking at a brand that has a huge amount of heritage. Longines is offering a lot for the money. And you know, you could buy an Aquaterra or you could buy this. And really the main difference there is brand. Like there are minor differences there. There are movement differences, yes. But most of that stuff is like icing on the cake. If you want a nice watch that could wear in every scenario, that dresses up, that is good looking and feels refined, you don't have to spend more money than something like this. I do, because I have a problem. It's an addiction, but you don't have to. This is a great watch. I think a lot of people should really consider this watch. So in the end, if you're out there looking for your first luxury watch, don't worry about getting a specific brand unless that's really what trips your trigger. You know, looking at those tiers that I used to look at of entry level luxury versus ultra luxury, who cares? If you're spending over $1,000 on a wristwatch, you've entered the realm of crazy town. Like you're buying a watch that is a luxurious item. And this certainly feels that way, which is why I would recommend it. If you're out there and you're looking, definitely put this on your list. Try it on, see if it trips your trigger. What do you guys think about Longines Conquest? And what do you think about Longines in general? I think they've been hitting a lot of home runs on their recent model lines, especially for the price that they're offering them at. And I'll see you in the next one. Take care.